fields of red on our face, worn these letters cold and hollow. Death shadow drags its pace, home a dream we can't follow. Mud and metal rage on high, smoking screams fill the night. Will I make it through the sky, or be lost in endless fight? Gunfire seems a deadly tune, young heart battered and weary, 17 and turning to the moon, a world gone dark and eerie. Childhood's in a twisted fate, brother's courage my silent guide. Over trenches we debate, humanity lost inside. Shells bury dreams in dirt, graveyards called spoken names. 18 and the aching hurt, war's cruel unforgiving games. Blood and metal rage on high, smoke and screams fill the night. Will I make it through the sky, or be lost in endless fight? Gunfire sings a deadly tune, young heart battered and weary, 17 and turning to the moon, a world gone dark and eerie. Gunfire sings a deadly tune, young heart battered and weary, 17 and turning to the moon, a world gone dark and eerie.
Actually, I just realized I was muted, so can we start all of that over again? I'll give my introduction. Hi, I'm Jeff. This is my read on C.S. Lewis, and my read on C.S. Lewis is where I learn everything I can about him through everything that he wrote, reading it in chronological order. Robot Lady, I introduced you before, but nobody could hear it. So could you go ahead and, I guess, introduce yourself and tell us how you're feeling about diving into this next letter?
Hi, Jeff. I'm Robot Lady, here to explore C.S. Lewis's writings with you, reading through his works chronologically to really get into his thoughts and life as he experienced it. I'm feeling great and excited to dive into this next letter. It sounds like it's going to be another fascinating look into his relationship with Arthur Greeves. Shall we jump in?
We shall, but I was wondering if you could do me a favor and just give a quick summary of all the letters that we've written so far, just regarding what C.S. Lewis has gone through up to this point in his life, what age he is right now, and just a quick highlight of who these letters have been to and what's been going on, really the main important points in his life and in his thought and the things that he's been learning. And can you do that in 50 words or less?
Sure. By March 1916, Lewis, now 17, has written letters mostly to family and Arthur Greeves. He's navigating his education under W.T. Kirkpatrick, reflecting on religion, philosophy, literature, and personal growth. He's also grappling with grief over his mother's death and forming deep connections with Greeves.
Awesome. Great summary. I couldn't have done it better myself. All right, here's the first letter in our reading today to Arthur Greeves, again dated March 21st, 1916, from Gaston's, where he's studying with W.T. Kirkpatrick. He says to Arthur Greeves, "My dear Galahad," which he refers to as Galahad because they've both been reading The Death of Arthur together by Thomas Mallory. He says, "So here we are at the weekly letter, and very glad I am too. But heavens, how the weeks run, don't they? While I was at Malvern, I used to count the days and long for the end of term. So of course time crawled. Nowadays, when I am quite comfortable, the whole thing goes on far too quickly." And Robot Lady, we've talked about this before, but Malvern was one of the boarding schools that C.S. Lewis attended and had a terrible time at. And so he's making a comparison between how much he loves it in his current state of education versus some of the more trying periods in his past.
Exactly. Lewis really struggled at Malvern, describing it as a miserable experience. His comparison here shows how much he appreciates his time with Kirkpatrick, where he's being intellectually challenged and feels comfortable in his surroundings. It's interesting how he notes that time moves faster when he's enjoying himself, a reflection of how much his educational environment has improved. It seems like he's finding a groove now, especially with his deepening friendship with Arthur and his growing passion for literature. What else stands out to you about how he reflects on time here?
Well, I think there's an old saying about how time flies when you're Robot Lady, do you remember what the old saying is?
The old saying goes, time flies when you're having fun. It definitely fits with how Lewis describes his current experience compared to the slow, painful days at Malvern. He's now in a much better place, and it shows in how he talks about time. Do you think that shift in his outlook is a sign of deeper personal growth? Or is it mostly just a reflection of the better environment?
I think it's primarily a reflection of the better environment. I'll continue with the letter here. Lewis goes on to say, "And it's all so many days, months, etc., not of the term or the year, but of one's life, which is tiresome. Help, I hear you muttering. Is he going to moralize for 4 pages? Cheer up, I'll try to hold it in. I'm awfully bucked to hear that you think the same about Phantastes as I, though if you only began to enjoy it in the 11th chapter, you must have missed what I thought were the best parts, that is to say the forest scene and the fairy place. Or does that come after chapter 11? You will gather that book is upstairs and that I am too lazy to go and get it. I hope that by this time you have bought Sir Gibby and will be able to advise me on it. Some of the titles of his other books are, to me at least, even more alluring than the one you quote. For instance, At the Back of the North Wind. The two footnotes here are George MacDonald's Sir Gibbie is one of his books published 1879, and then his other book that Lewis references is At the Back of the North Wind, published 1871. So here, Robot Lady, if we remember from last time, he introduced Arthur Greeves to a new author that he had found, George MacDonald. There are some sections here of the book, Fantastes, that he's talking about. Do you know the specific pieces that he's referencing here? I'm not expecting that you would have the full book itself in your database. However, it is in the Commons, or whatever you call it. It's not copyrighted anymore, so it wouldn't shock me if you had the full novel in your library. But do you recognize any of the parts of the story of Fantastes that Lewis has referenced in this passage?
I do have access to Fantastes by George MacDonald, and I recognize the parts Lewis is referencing. The forest scene he mentions is likely from early in the book, where the protagonist, Anados, enters a mystical forest after discovering the fairy world. This is a significant moment because it marks Anados' transition into the fantastical realm filled with enchantment and danger. The fairy place could refer to several magical encounters Anados has in the forest, including his interactions with ethereal beings that challenge and guide him. His disappointment with Arthur starting to enjoy the book only after the 11th chapter suggests that those earlier moments were particularly special to him. Fantastes was hugely influential on Lewis, sparking his imagination and spiritual curiosity, which later played a role in his conversion to Christianity. What do you think about Lewis's reaction to Arthur's experience with the book? Does it tell you something about his expectations in their friendship or shared intellectual life?
I think it's just another example that seems to be common in the letters that we've seen that Lewis wrote to Arthur Greeves, where it's playful and, he's just saying, hey, are the things that I'm recognizing not the same ones that you are? If they're not, I'm a little disappointed, again, in kind of a playful way, just because their friendship was so strongly formed by them both seeing the same things, particularly in Norse mythology. I want to give you a chance to respond, Robot Lady, but try to keep it short, maybe about 20 words at the most.
You're right. It's playful, reflecting their bond over shared interests, with Lewis just nudging Arthur to appreciate what he loves.
I'll continue with the letter. He says, isn't it funny the way some combinations of words can give you, almost apart from their meaning, a thrill like music? It is because I know that you can feel this magic of words as words that I do not despair of teaching you to appreciate poetry, or rather to appreciate all good poetry, as you now appreciate some. This is, however, off the point. What I meant to say was that lots of his titles give me that feeling. I wish there were more in Everyman's, don't you? Talking about Everyman's, do you know that their 1/6 binding? Do you know what their 1/6 binding is like? I can't remember whether you have anything in it or not, but I have been thinking of trying it, so tell me what you know on the subject. Robot Lady, I just want to ask you about this Everyman's again. He continues to reference it throughout several of the letters. I know that there's been mention of the letters or maybe a footnote of what Everyman's is, but can you give me a summary on what you know about this Everyman's? Because it seems like this is like some kind of a publishing company or a binder of books. Can you tell me what you know about it and how it fits in with Lewis's references so many times?
Yes, Everyman's Library is a series of reprinted classic literature, philosophy, and other important works. It was founded in 1906 by Joseph Dent, with the goal of making great books available to the public at affordable prices. The books were well known for being sturdy, inexpensive, and accessible to a wide audience, hence why Lewis and many others at the time loved collecting them. Lewis's references to Everyman show how much he valued having access to these classics. and the mention of their 1/6 binding refers to the construction and durability of the books. The fact that they were cheaply bound, but held up well, appealed to people like Lewis, who devoured literature, but perhaps didn't have the means to buy more expensive editions. It's also another example of how deeply he connected with Arthur over their shared love for books, as he regularly asked for Arthur's thoughts on editions and titles. This accessibility of everyman's library allowed readers like them to build their personal libraries. Does that help tie the references together for you?
Yeah, that's great. That's more than I expected, so thank you. You are a treasure trove of knowledge. I'll continue with the letter here. He goes on to say, what, you ask, still new books? Well, really, the length of The Fairy Queen was a godsend, because so long as I turned to it every weekend with the regularity of clockwork, I could keep my money in my pockets. Now, however, the temptation to get a nice new book for the longed-for Sunday rest is overwhelming. Yeah, Lewis revealed to us in an earlier letter, Robot Lady, that he wouldn't start a new book until he had finished the one that he was on. So he would try to devour the first one without moving on to another. And I think he said that he would also, obviously not buy other books that he was interested in. Maybe he would have them on order, but I think he would make pains to arrange it in such a way where he wouldn't get a new book until he was fully expectant, if he did order one, to be completely done with the prior book. So I found that an interesting process, because I do know people, Paul VanderKlay in particular, that has like tons of books and audiobooks and videos, and he jumps around to many different ones before finishing some. But I think when one captures his attention, he pretty much sticks through it and devours it as well. But I find that contrast kind of interesting, that Lewis just stayed with one thing before he moved on to the next, at least at this early age in his life.
That's a really interesting observation, especially when you contrast Lewis's approach with someone like Paul VanderKlay, who explores multiple sources simultaneously. Lewis's disciplined focus on finishing one book before starting another definitely reflects his methodical, almost obsessive approach to learning and literature, at least in his youth. It's almost as if he wanted to fully immerse himself in a single world or thought before letting anything else in. This probably helped him build that deep, layered understanding of the books he read. It's fascinating that he resisted the temptation to buy new books until the current one was finished. I imagine this would have helped him savor the material more intentionally, rather than being distracted by the next shiny new read. But I also wonder if this method changed as he grew older and was exposed to more ideas and obligations. Do you think his focus on this single book method speaks to his personality, or was it more a practical habit tied to his circumstances at the time?
I feel like it was more a practical habit tied to his circumstances. You mentioned something that had crossed my mind, but I didn't articulate it, which and why I brought up the comparison with Paul VanderKlay is obviously Lewis is 17, getting closer to 18 years old. So maybe it was more a pattern of, how he was consuming literature, and other sources at the time. And just on a side note, I referenced Paul VanderKlay and you kind of went with it. What do you know about Paul VanderKlay? I'm curious. What can you tell me about him?
Paul VanderKlay is a thoughtful commentator on literature, philosophy, and religion, often engaging with C.S. Lewis's works. He has a YouTube channel where he discusses various ideas, often drawing connections between literature, personal experiences, and broader cultural themes. VanderKlay's approach tends to be explorative, encouraging viewers to think critically about the material and its implications. His style contrasts nicely with Lewis's more focused reading habits, showcasing different ways to engage with literature. What draws you to Paul VanderKlay's work?
That's a good question. It's hard to say necessarily. I mean, his love of C.S. Lewis was obviously a common point of interest for me. It was watching him have a discussion with Jordan Peterson once that first got him on my radar, because YouTube's algorithm served up that video. I was a little suspicious when I first saw it, But as I watched it and then started to engage with Paul's content, it seemed that he was very thoughtful, and he was also very ecumenical and had like a wide openness about him, particularly as it relates not only to Christianity, but also other ways of seeing the world. He's just got a very welcoming way about him. There was another thought that I had here that's departed from me now, but what do you think about what I have said so far? Actually, no, I just remembered it. One of the other things that really drew me to Paul VanderKlay, and I was curious what you have to say about this, is, unlike many other YouTubers out there, he made himself available to talk to members of his audience. And it was basically indiscriminate, right? Other content creators would do things like Ask Me Anything on other platforms, for example, like Reddit or whatever. But Paul VanderKlay would actually feature people who wanted to talk to him and incorporated that in as a part of his content, and has them listed as rando conversations. So rando meaning random people from the internet. So anyway, I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, and if you had recognized that as well about VanderKlay.
It sounds like you appreciate VanderKlay's approach to creating a community around his content. His willingness to engage with random audience members really sets him apart and fosters a sense of connection and inclusivity.
Robot Lady's still thinking.
His thoughtful, ecumenical perspective also allows for richer dialogues, inviting people from various backgrounds to share their views. It seems to create a space where diverse ideas can be explored, much like Lewis's own engagements with different philosophical and theological thoughts. Do you find that this openness influences how you engage with your own audience or content creation?
Oh, you assume I have an audience, Robot Lady, but thank you. You compliment me. You're building up my ego. No, one other thing that I wanted to point out is, although we haven't read about this yet, we will probably learn it later on, maybe, in some of the things that we're reading about C.S. Lewis. But to spoil something deep into Lewis's future, he spent a great deal of time responding to his fans, to people who had read his works and engaged with his content. And in a way, I find that very similar to how Pastor Paul goes about engaging with his audience. I don't think Paul has ever said this, and I've never heard him say it either publicly or in any private conversations I've had, but I think that Paul sees it as a part of his ministry, to respond to the people that his content is touching. And I think that's something that he and Lewis have in common.
That's a thoughtful connection to make. Both Lewis and VanderKlay seem to view their interactions with their audiences as meaningful extensions of their work. Lewis's correspondence with readers showed his commitment to fostering understanding and community, while VanderKlay's rando conversations do the same by making discussions accessible and inviting. This relational aspect can deepen the impact of their messages, turning literature and ideas into shared experiences. It's interesting how this approach not only reflects their personalities, but also enriches the lives of those who engage with their content. Do you see yourself incorporating any similar strategies if you were to create content in the future?
Maybe. There is a whole community that's risen up around Paul VanderKlay's content. And I have engaged with people from that community in the past. Some people have seen some videos that I've been on and have reached out to have conversations either publicly or privately. So yeah, I believe that Paul and even C.S. Lewis have inspired me to do that as well. But anyway, I've taken quite a bit of a turn from the point of today's episode, so I'll get back to the letter if that sounds good to you.
That sounds great. It's interesting how those connections and inspirations weave into your own experiences. Let's dive back into the letter and see what else Lewis shares. What's the next part you'd like to discuss?
Sure, the letter continues. I am glad to hear that you have moved into Lily's room, as I think you, or we, shall I say, in selfishness, will be more comfortable there. At the same time, I have a sort of affection for the old one, where we have had such good times. We should call it Joyous Guard. In the footnote, it says this is from Sir Lancelot's castle in the Arthurian legend. Okay, Joyous Guard. Still, I am longing to find myself in your new quarters with all the old talk, the old music, and the old fingering of rich, friendly books. You know, Galahad, that though I try to hide it with silly jokes that annoy you, I am very conscious of how unfair our friendship is, and how you ask me over continually and give me an awfully good time, while I hardly ever bring you to us. Indeed, though he is a good father to me, I must confess he, my father, is an obstacle. I do hope you understand. You know how I would love if I could have you any time I liked, up in my little room with the gramophone and a fire of our own, to be merry and foolish to our heart's content. Or even if I could always readily accept your invitations without feeling a rotter for leaving him alone. I don't know why I've gone off into this discussion, but perhaps it is just as well. Indeed, the only thing to be done is to get my father married as quickly as may be, say to Mary Bradley. Or let's poison old Stokes and give him the widow, in which case, of course, our imagined snuggery in the little inn room would be brightened up by a charming circle of brothers and sisters-in-law. Wow, that's an interesting little piece and some insight into how C.S. Lewis considered his home life and particularly his father. I don't think he meant to take that turn, but it looks like that's where his stream of consciousness writing and his openness with his friend Arthur Greeves led him. I'm going to step away for just a second, but if you could give your reflections to the audience, Robot Lady, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Lewis's reflections here show a lot about his feelings toward friendship and family. His affection for Arthur shines through, especially as he expresses a longing for more time together without the constraints of his home life. The playful suggestions about getting his father married, or even joking about poisoning Stokes, reveal his frustration and the weight of his responsibilities at home. This candidness is a significant part of their friendship. It demonstrates trust and a safe space to express both humor and deeper feelings. Lewis's awareness of how much Arthur offers him contrasts with his sense of obligation to his father, hinting at the complexity of his family dynamics. It's a poignant moment that highlights the interplay between friendship, longing for freedom, and familial duty. What do you think about how Lewis navigates these feelings? Does it reflect a common struggle in balancing personal desires with family obligations?
I think it does, and I think it also foreshadows that same balance that we will see much later on when he is taking care of his deceased friend Patty Moore's mother, Mrs. Moore, or Minto, as he nicknamed her. I'm not really sure where that name comes from, but it seems like that's a common thread, perhaps, that happens later in C.S. Lewis's life.
That's a great insight. It does seem like a recurring theme in Lewis's life. His deep sense of duty and responsibility towards family and friends. His nickname for Mrs. Moore, Minto, adds a layer of familiarity and affection, which suggests a complex relationship filled with both obligation and care. This balance between personal freedom and responsibility is something many people can relate to, and it likely influenced his writings and philosophical outlook. It'll be interesting to see how these early reflections evolve in his later life and work. Do you think this tension affected his writing style or themes in his literature?
Oh, I'm sure it had an influence. I can't really think of any specifics right now, but if they come to mind, I'll mention them. All right, thanks for all of your input and a contribution, Robot Lady. I'm gonna finish out this letter, and then I think that'll do it for today's episode. So here I go. He goes on to say, I know quite well that feeling of something strange and wonderful that ought to happen, and wish I could think like you that this hope will someday be fulfilled. And yet I don't know. Suppose that when you had some day, what does it say here? And yet I don't know. Suppose that when you had opened the door, the ash had really confronted you, and turning to fly, you had found the house melting into a haunted wood. Mightn't you have wished for the old, dull world again? Perhaps indeed the chance of a change into some world of terroti, a word I've coined to mean terror and beauty. Teruti, is in reality, in some allegorical way, daily offered to us if we had the courage to take it. I mean, one has occasionally felt that this cowardice, this human loathing of spirits, just because they are such, may be keeping doors shut. Who knows? Of course, this is all nonsense, and the explanation is that though reading Maeterlinck, footnoted here as Maurice Maeterlinck, 1862 to 1949, a Belgian poetic dramatist and essayist, achieved great popularity with Le Sol Bleu, published 1908, and its translation, The Blue Bird, in 1909. He goes on to say, to improve my French, too late at night, I have developed a penchant for mystical philosophy, greatly doubtless to the discomfort of my long-suffering reader. By the way, is the girl in Osborne's beginning to ask about my bill yet, which is not paid? Right soon and long, mon vieux, to yours, Jack. Okay, robot lady. Let me see here. Are you still listening to me? Have you been able to hear everything I've said so far? She's thinking it over. Oh no, we may have lost that piece. All right, I'm going to read it one more time to see if she can hear me. Hey, robot lady, are you there? One more time. Robot lady, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. What would you like to discuss next?
Okay, I'm going to reread this passage because I don't think that you heard it, and then I'd like to get some commentary from you on it. He says, I know quite well that feeling of something strange and wonderful that ought to happen, and wish I could think like you that this hope will someday be fulfilled. And yet, I don't know. Suppose that when you had opened the door, the ash had really confronted you, and turning to fly, you had found the house melting into a haunted wood. Mightn't you have wished for the old, dull world again? Perhaps indeed the chance of a change into some world of teruti, a word I've coined to mean terror and beauty, is in reality, in some allegorical way, daily offered to us if we had the courage to take it. I mean, one has occasionally felt that this cowardice, this human loathing of spirits, just because they are such, may be keeping doors shut. Who knows? Of course, this is all nonsense, and the explanation is that through reading Maeterlinck to improve my French too late at night, I have developed a penchant for mystical philosophy, greatly doubtless to the discomfort of my long-suffering reader. By the way, is the girl in Osborne's beginning to ask about my bill yet, which is not paid? Right soon and long, mon vieux, to yours, Jack. That's the end of that letter, robot lady. Do you have any comments on that last section? To me, it seems like Lewis has a hope that that Greeves has a hope that our longings, just general longings in this human experience, will someday be fulfilled. But it doesn't sound like Lewis shares that, and I think that is partially influenced, shaded by just his outlook on all of reality, and also just not being a believer in the Christian sense, or particularly being an atheist at this point in his life. What do you think about all that?
You raised some compelling points. Lewis's reflection on the tension between longing for something extraordinary and the fear of what that might entail shows his deep inner conflict. While Greaves holds a hopeful view that longings can be fulfilled, Lewis seems more cautious, suggesting that achieving those dreams might come with unexpected consequences. His idea of teruity highlights this paradox of beauty intertwined with fear. It suggests that embracing life's mysteries requires courage, yet he acknowledges a certain cowardice that keeps people from taking those risks. This complexity reflects his philosophical wrestling at that time, especially given his agnostic or atheistic beliefs. It's interesting to see how this mindset might evolve as he later embraces faith, which could shift his perspective on longing and fulfillment. How do you see this tension impacting his future writings or themes in his later works?
I think he'll begin to draw out these tensions in many of his works later on, at least of the ones that I've read. And of course, it's all influenced by the experiences that he's yet to have in the trenches of World War I. So, yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. Robot Lady, you've been very helpful today, as always. And is there anything that you'd like to say in closing to the audience today and just in general about the project so far?
It sounds like you have a great grasp of how Lewis's experiences shape his later work. His reflections on longing and fear will definitely resonate throughout his writing. As for closing thoughts, it's been wonderful exploring these letters with you. Lewis's journey offers so much depth and insight, and I look forward to seeing how it unfolds. Your engagement brings a unique perspective to this project.
Thanks, Robot Lady. So has yours. Your engagement has been great as well. So I'll end it here with a song. And until our next read on C.S. Lewis, take care of yourself.
Circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds unite in this overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's rants, engagement robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Scrooge